As some of you may know, tomorrow marks the expiration of the current contract that the Writers Guild has with the studios and networks. In fact, I believe the sides are actually meeting all weekend to hash this out. As a WGA member, I remember what happened 9 years ago when there was a strike that lasted for 100 days, and we hope that this can be avoided. Saying this, I'm extremely proud to introduce our next panel, sponsored by the Writers Guild of America West, Women on Top, the creative forces behind the awesome shows Queen of the South and Queen Sugar. Please welcome the panel moderated by Landrum, the co-chair of the Asian American Writers Committee at the WGA.
When you guys started, TV was not necessarily looked upon as this amazing landscape of artistry. So when did you realize that there was such a job as being a TV writer? And how did you get,
that's a good question.
You know, how did you get inspired to do it?
I would say, for me, TV writing didn't really become a reality until after college. In college, I focused on playwriting and moved to New York City and worked in theater as a playwright and director, and I was sort of on that course. And I remember going to a conference in New York, and there was a TV writer there. And he said something about TV writing, and I was part of that crowd in New York that kind of looked down on television. I was a theater director and a playwright. And and I was like, I don't know about TV. And then when I had a fellowship at Second Stage, which is responsible for launching a lot of American female playwrights, like Teresa Rebeck. And while I was there, my mentor, Sheldon Epps, who is the artistic director of the Pasadena Playhouse, said, if you have any desire to work in TV or film, you need to do it now while you're young. And he kind of burst my Broadway bubble. And he was like, kid, you're not going to make any money in theater. Like, you're not, like, he asked questions that I really, you know, when you're in your early 20s, you just feel like you're invincible. And he said, do you want to have a family? He said, if you mount a play at Dallas Theater Center, 3 months later, then you're going to be at the Old Globe in San Diego. And how are you going to manage being a wife and a mother if you're traveling so much? And then he also made it very clear, you're not going to make an adult living. At the time, I was living at home with my parents in New Jersey, and I was commuting, but I didn't have to pay for rent or food. I just had to pay, you know, for my lunch and to get to my job. So I hadn't thought about those things. And then when I moved to LA, it was about figuring out, where do I fit? As a playwright, you're not necessarily sure if you're a 1 hour or if you're a half hour, if you're a feature writer. So I shadowed Sheldon on a couple of shows, and because I had also directed theater, I shadowed him, and he was doing a lot of three-camera, like multi-camera sitcom, and I was like, this just doesn't resonate with me at all. And then I took a bunch of classes at UCLA Extension. I took a half hour, a 1 hour, and a feature writing class, and I liked the 1 hour class the most. And I will say, like, one thing, as a child when I was watching, not to date myself, but Facts of Life, there was a name that always caught my attention on screen, and it was Asad Khalidah's name. And I don't know if it was because it was like other, and it was like, oh, my mom's name is Kwong, and everyone always pronounces it Kwang. And I don't know if I like related to that, but to this day, I remember seeing that name come up on screen, and I think it was just a subtle thing of like, it's possible. Like, if you want to do this, there is someone like you that does this.
Wow, good answer. Hi. So part A of your question, yes, the polarity has completely changed between features and TV in the 23 years I've been in the business. When I started, features were the prestigious thing, and it was hard for a TV writer to make the jump. Now it's completely the reverse, where I'm getting approached to write features because I'm a TV writer. So that's part A of that. Part B is I grew up in Montebello, East Los Angeles, really 4 miles east of here. Had no concept of the TV business at all, the feature business. I went to UCLA Film School. Was told, don't apply to the film program, you'll never get in, by the advisor of the program. Wow. I applied, I got in, was just writing movies, and then I did this program called the Disney Fellowship Program in its very first year, which at the time wasn't very prestigious. It was kind of this weird minority program for women. I did it, and it was life-changing. You know, I really am a believer in those programs. And they helped me get an agent, and that agent told me, have you considered writing television? I had not. I had not even seen a television script. It was a completely different era where stuff wasn't available on the internet. I watched they said, what? I said, what do I do? They said, write a spec. I studied a TV show called Crime and Punishment. It was about this like Latina a detective in Los Angeles. So I wrote a spec, and within 6 months I got hired to work for Dick Wolf on a show called New York Undercover. And then I've been working full-time since, mostly in television, and kind of going back and forth doing feature work as well.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Impressive. Now, the second kind of part of that is, that's how you guys first got interested and involved. How did your family react? Because also, what is your family background, if you don't mind? Because a lot of people in the audience probably have families who may not think that Hollywood and television or features is necessarily a place to have a career. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that.
Sure. I'm half Korean and half African American, and I was just joking in the green room. Bonnie and I know each other because we're part of a Hapa group. Hapa means half Asian. And it is not a Korean mother's dream for you to like go be a writer's assistant and make minimum wage. Like, my mom wanted me to go to Harvard or Yale and be like a doctor or lawyer. I'm lucky. I have an older sister who went to Cornell and got her PhD. So check. I kind of got the freedom to be who I wanted to be. And both my parents knew from a young age that I was probably going to pursue some type of career in the arts. They weren't extremely enthusiastic about that, but they were supportive. By the time I graduated from college and I had done a lot of internships, I had written plays, I had directed plays, I had, by hook or by crook, assisted directors, looking up directors in American Theater Magazine that I wanted to shadow. They saw that this was for real, and then they just got on board. Again, having an older sister who did the right thing helped a lot. I don't think if I was the oldest, I probably wouldn't have been given that as much freedom. I probably would have had to consistently push back. But now, one of my first internships in San Diego, my mother had just finished a job, and she moved to San Diego with me, got an apartment, set it up, drove me to rehearsal every day, made lunch for me. She just did everything because she was like, this is what you want to do, and I'm going to support you. So I'm very fortunate. I don't think that that's always the case. But again, I'm second born, so.
Oh, that's really cute. So I'm not going to lie. I had a very rough upbringing. Both of my parents were in and out of prison. I'm not speaking out of school. I love my parents, but they had massive drug problems. The silver lining of that is that the bar was really low. All I basically had to do was stay out of jail, and I was doing better than them already. So when I got out of film school, I was doing the Disney Fellowship, and I remember I was making $30,000 a week, and I was the most successful person in my family.
$30,000 a year.
Oh, a year.
Yeah.
A year. I'm sorry.
Wow.
I'm sorry. I don't want to oversell. Oh my gosh, $30,000 a year plus benefits.
Yeah.
And my family was super proud, and they remained pretty impressed by it. So.
I had shared with them the story that my mom is Taiwanese, and I didn't know until afterwards. I grew up in San Antonio. She had a Chinese restaurant, and she basically told me after I had made it that if I hadn't succeeded in 3 years, she would have basically pulled me back home and made me work at the restaurant. So,
Wow.
yeah, so I'm like, yay. So now you've made it as you've had your first job as a writer, and now you're rising up through the ranks. And at some point, and I think this was the first leap for you, right? You go from being, a co-executive producer or somebody who helps runs rooms, but then what is that leap like to then all of a sudden be given, you're now the showrunner? How does that happen? And when, or is it something where you just realize no, now's my time? Or does someone help nudge you into that time?
I'll speak because this is my first show running experience. I feel like when I was on Nashville and I made the leap to co-executive producer, I was like, wow, I'm a co-EP. I'm one of the big dogs in the room. You just kind of feel like this. And I think I felt more like, wow, at that moment. And then from that job, I went, when Nashville was canceled before it went on to another network, I got a job in between, and I was a co-EP and ran the room. And that's when, and I didn't know, like your agents kind of tell you half the story. They don't always tell you things that are coming in, but there had been calls, I guess, show running opportunities, some of which they were like, no, you're not taking that show. Some that you don't really know about. And then there were others that started to creep up that I was like, oh, well, I want to take that meeting. And they were like, we don't think you should take that meeting. And so that's when I became aware of like, oh, okay, so this is when it happens. And then it was when I was on the breaks for VH1, and I loved that job. I wasn't looking for another job. I was really happy. We worked out of a house in Santa Monica. Like there were 7 of us. The co-showrunners were awesome. They just completely trusted me and the staff, and we had a wonderful time. And that's when I got the call for Queen Sugar. And I was like, I got to watch the first 3 episodes, and I was like, this is it. Like, this is the show. And it's funny because I thought I would be like, oh, and like here, but I think I also, and just speaking as a woman and as a woman of color, and you've probably maybe had this experience, I've done multiple years at the same level. Like you're asked to repeat levels. I've repeated staff writer, I've repeated co-producer, I've repeated, so you don't just, I know there are some people in Hollywood that are just like, I'm a staff writer, and then like 4 seasons later, they're a co-EP on some short order cable. And I was like, please. As an assistant, I did 48 episodes on 24. And so by the time I got to run my first meeting, a concept meeting and a production meeting, because the writers on 24 did not go to their meetings, I went in their place. I had already done 48 meetings answering questions to department heads of like, what color hat should the actor wear? So I don't know, there was something about feeling completely prepared and primed for the experience, whereas I didn't have a whole lot of anxiety. And we did not, on Queen Sugar, we had a 20-week lead time just in the room before production started. So I just got to be in the room every day and not get pulled to like post and being on a network call. And we had a very sacred time, which Ava DuVernay, the creator, demanded that season 2 start with a large chunk of time in the room. So I felt ready. More than anything else, I felt very fortunate and blessed to be given that opportunity. But I also was like, I've been climbing the ladder for like 16 years. So this is not something that just sort of happened overnight. It was like many, many years sort of leading to this point. And I thought I would feel like, woo, like this is different. But I just felt like it was the anticipated and next step. And I felt very fortunate to have worked with a lot of really great people along the way who sewed into me. Dee Johnson, who's another Asian American woman who ran Nashville. I also worked for Liz Heldens on Deception, another strong woman who let me run post when she got her second show. So I had a lot of experience in different aspects that there are some co-EPs who've never been to post, but I got to run it for my boss. So I just felt like I was fortunate enough to have bosses who mentored me, who sewed into me, so that when it was my shot, I felt prepared.
That's great. So I also had been in the business a really long time before making the jump to showrunner. And for me, I purposely spent a long time in the middle because I had 2 kids. So I kind of wanted to, this is just my choice, but I wanted to wait until they were out of the house before I ran a show. So I stayed at producer basically and told my agents I don't want to move up. Because if you look at TV credits, there's all these like co-producer, producer, producer. So each one is kind of a little jump in money and responsibility. So I kind of just chilled out in the middle of the pack for a lot of years. And then when my youngest daughter moved to New York, just a few months later, the call came in to run a show just kind of out of the blue. So it was really just, I had had opportunities before, but the timing was just right. And I think like Monica said, because I had had so many jobs before, I was completely ready. And I had worked for some really great showrunners like John Wells and a guy named John Worth, and I had worked for some crazy guys. Like, I'm not going to lie, just some not good showrunners. So I had a really good model for stuff that I wanted to do and the way that I didn't want to do things. So for me also, it's been a really smooth transition. because we'd both been in the business so long. I think we knew it's harder when you haven't done a lot of seasons of television. So.
Well, can you, this is a nice segue, so Natalie,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, expanding a little bit into, because we kind of talked about this in the green room, about being moms and how, like obviously it did influence your career and affected your
Greatly.
choices.
Greatly, yeah.
And if you don't mind maybe sharing, like, kind of some of the crazy things people have said to you, either about being a mom and being a writer, and what you find now as a showrunner, and you obviously work with writers of various backgrounds and everything. As a mom, how does that work into being a writer and as a showrunner?
So the negatives first. I was sharing with them backstage that I was told flat out when I was pregnant by a big agent that I still deal with to this day, you won't work in television as a woman with a kid. I mean, it's just something, it's crazy for someone to say flat out to you that stuff. But I was told that. As far as, having a kid and being in the TV business, it's really, really hard. The only way that I made it work is I had my ex was a musician, he was a stay-at-home dad, and my family's here in LA. So that's how I made it work. But it was really tough. One time I was leaving for work, and my son said, go ahead, do your blood sticks. Meaning, like, the pencil hurt his heart so much that I was bleeding. I was like, that's a great phrase. So you feel like all working mothers, that guilt. And the schedule of TV can make people very disrespectful to your schedule. Like, sometimes I've had jobs where people literally spend the night in the office to work all night. And so it's super, super challenging. On the positive side, I will say there's been jobs where I've been hired because I have that experience as a mother, because for instance, I work on Sarah Connor Chronicles, and of course Sarah and John had this, in the TV show, this relationship. So I was hired because I had happened to have a teenage son at the time. So I also think the other plus side for me is I had really good people and soft skills because I had successfully parented 2 kids. And I think that's a really big part of show running, that of managing people. That was like, that's the plus side of it, is I actually think it made me a better showrunner. So.
I'm really fortunate. My mom is here in LA, and so she helps out a lot with Dylan, my daughter, who's here with me, who has been in the office with me a lot the past couple of weeks because of the impending potential strike. So we were in the office, and Valerie Chu is here. She's my assistant and also the writer of episode 10 that Julie Dash is going to direct. And it just, I'm very fortunate that I have a husband who's very hands-on, that I have a mother who completely spoils my child, and I have a daughter who's very understanding and who was with me till 10:45 in the office one night because my husband was out of town, and who's with me in the office today. She actually likes going into the office. I don't know why. I guess because we have good snacks, right, in the kitchen. But it was challenging. A friend of mine who is a TV writer said, don't get pregnant until you're co-producer, because once you have producer behind your name, like, you're safe. I didn't listen to I was like, my clock doesn't really line up with that whole co-producer thing, especially since I just repeated staff writer. So I had I got pregnant with Dylan in between a staff writer and story editor year, which was like bad form, so my friend thought. It was challenging when I was 8 months pregnant. My agent, I told this story in the green room, said to my manager, can she not look pregnant when she goes out on staffing meetings? I was like, I'm 8 months. It's really, really challenging. So it's hard when people find out you have a kid in meetings, they're questioning, okay, can she work late? Is the kid going to be a thing? Does she have to go to parent-teacher conferences and concerts? And Dylan was doing competitive gymnastics, and so there's a lot. The thing that I love about it now as a showrunner is I'm like, if you have a thing with your kid, go. Like, there's enough people in the room. If you have a concert, you shouldn't miss it. And, like, I'm very understanding because I have a kid, and I always felt like it was kind of like that thing that I had to be like, I have to leave at 6, and would try not to say why.
That's right, yeah.
It's like kind of like that unspoken thing where you just kind of don't say why you have to leave, but then you sneak out and you're at some like orchestra concert. But it shouldn't be that way, because I feel like having children, having a family, being a mom, it makes us we have other experiences to mine from people in the room who don't have that. They have different experiences, but that makes us better storytellers, quite frankly, and I agree with you, it makes us really compassionate managers of people and their schedules. So.
Well, leads exactly into my next question, which was the managerial side. So I don't know if you guys may also want to just shed a little brief discussion on what a showrunner job is for you, because while obviously there's the creative aspect, you guys, you have the vision for the show and what the season's going to look like and all that stuff. There's the probably not much talked about managerial day-to-day nitty-gritty part of the job. So could you explain what is a day in the life?
Sure. I feel very fortunate. I mentioned the 20-week lead time that we had. We were also, because last season they cross-boarded, meaning they shot 2 episodes at a time, we were told we were going to do that again. And so it would really help, nudge, nudge, hint, hint, if the writers had 10 scripts before production started. So our staff basically just brought their best game to the table, and we finished 10 scripts before cameras rolled on March 3rd. Right. It took a lot. You know how hard that is. It took a lot. And it was also kind of like, we have such a great staff that we found out our studio is Warner Horizon, that the closest a staff had ever gotten was 9. And I think when I told them, they were like, game on, we're going to do it. We're going to be the staff that gets 10. Doing that helped tremendously, because during that time, I wasn't dragged to post. I didn't have to go to set. I didn't have to deal with any of the physical production aspects of the show, just the stories, just the scripts. And so we were able to weave this beautiful narrative of the Bordelon family and the challenges that they were facing running a farm for the first time, these siblings, this sibling rivalry and old wounds. Cut to when production starts. That was very challenging, because now, the crew is up and running, the actors are there, and so you have another element to deal with. Cuts are coming in, so in between now, and we're in sort of a even more heightened state because of the challenges of the potential strike, but you're being pulled from, okay, I have to go to post because I have to, this cut has to go to the studio tomorrow, so I have to section off, 2 hours time, and because post is not in our offices, we have to drive there, and then I have to count that into the time. So I'd like to start my day in the room. I think showrunners are different. On my last show, Nashville, Dee loved post. Is hands down one of the best showrunners I've ever worked with in terms of post being sort of your last pass at the script. I love being in the room. I mean, I like being in post, but I'm ride or die for the room. I feel like that's where the magic happens. That's where it's I love to play in the room. It's like jazz, And so I would push post to the end of the day, and then I would keep saying, I'll be there in an hour. Oh, no, tell them I'll be there in 2 hours. Okay, no, push it to 6. And then I realized I needed to put post at the beginning of my day, because I would always push things for the room. So I go to post now first thing. And that way the editor has the rest of the day to work on the notes, and then they can get the cutout, and then we don't have to pay for overtime for the assistants. So now I do the reverse. I start in post. I try to start in the room for an hour, get things up and running, leave it to the number 2, Jason Wilborn, who's great. And then I go to post, and then I come back, and then everyone brings me up to speed, and then I'm able to stay. And then middle to end of the day, Val's these are the phone calls that you have to do, and I'll check in with the studio exec, I'll check in with our line producer, I'll check in with our producing director, I'll do an actor call if they have questions about the script, but I'm ride or die for the room. And so as much time as I can spend in the room, I want to be in the room, because I feel like that's my strength as a showrunner, is story, and everything else sort of falls secondary to that. And I've had to learn to manage my time around that if I want to do that, if I want to prioritize that.
So you probably got from her answer. So show running basically means you're in charge of the entire show. So that means you're in charge of the scripts, you're in charge of production, you're in charge of post-production, and you're in charge of managing the budget. So every showrunner finds their own way. I know showrunners who spend all their time in post and barely touch scripts. I've worked for people who do the reverse, who spend all their time in scripts and do post. I don't want to bore you with like, my way of managing things, that I've sort of come to over a couple of years. But, I basically do write a couple of scripts a year, so I have some writing time. Right now we're in post, so, like Monica, I'm doing a couple hours of post. But really your day can be everything from, getting a call from the studio and network yelling at you about something to, figuring out what lunch is because two people are arguing about it, to talking to an actress who has to do a nude scene. I mean, it's just like a variety of putting out fires all day long. I think that's, and everybody does it their own way. Like everyone finds their own path kind of thing.
Because basically the buck stops with you, right? Like in terms of,
Yeah.
like, everyone who has a question, always eventually it seems to be going to
Yeah,
you.
it does. I think the biggest surprise for me was as a showrunner was just realizing how much managing up there is. I'm super hands-on with the budget. I don't know how you handle it, but I kind of micromanage that. Not because I care, because I want to put the best show on the screen and to figure out what I'm able to do. Like this year I took the show to Bogota. We shot 2 episodes in Bogota. So when I first pitched that to the network, they said,
How can you afford that?
I pitched it to them, and a month later they said, "Oh, we thought you were kidding." I said, "No, I want to go to Bogota and shoot." So it was up to me to proof of concept to how I was going to make that work budget-wise. So because of stuff like that, I'm like super hands-on in that department as well. So I think that was, for me, kind of the biggest area of learning and making the jump to showrunner. And I do spend a lot of my time kind of on internal management of the crew or camera package, like stuff like that. I personally am pretty hands-on with. So.
And now we also talked a little bit about, being women of color, being, so there's not only gender, there's also diversity. What was it like in the rooms when you were coming up? Were you like the only woman or person of color? And also now that you're showrunners, how do you address diversity? And actually both of your shows are very, like, obviously, you can talk more about all the directing because I know
Mandate.
yes, the Queen Sugar had a mandate about women directors, and it's amazing. And I know you were
that's
talking
right.
about the recent, just the staff changeover, and which I think is phenomenal. So I would love if, Natalie, you wouldn't mind
Yeah, I'll
discussing.
say first, I think my experience is probably different from Monica. I'm half Mexican, I look very white, so I don't get that walk in the room kind of reaction to my ethnicity or whatever. I will say that I think that's put me in some situations where I've heard some really bad shit. I'm just not gonna lie about people of color, about Latinos in specific, and so I take that stuff very strongly. I grew up in a really traditional Mexican American household, and so I've done, for instance, on Queen of the South, I've hired 7 out of 8 diversity writers. I really pushed the network to hire also female and diversity directors, till I got a call from the studio. I didn't tell you guys this story. They said, we need more comfort food directors now. I said, is that comfort food like fluffy white mashed potatoes? And there's this super big beat, and the Asian woman executive goes, yes, that's what that means.
Wow.
And so they basically were just like, you can't hire any more female and diversity directors. I'd pushed up against it, kind of as far as I could. So,
Amazing.
yeah, so for me, it's something that's foremost in my mind. I'm pushing as hard as I can. I've had seen and heard a lot of stuff in the past 20 years. Unfortunately, I haven't seen it get that much better. It's kind of one of the shocking things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I started as a writer's assistant on 24. There were no female writers on the show and 1 person of color who was the diversity hire. I went to Lost, and I was the diversity hire. And most people can't tell that I'm half Korean. And in the meeting, they were big fans of 24. For like 20 minutes, we talked about 24, and I was like, I'm not getting this job because they don't know anything about me. And then at like minute 25 of the meeting, they were like, so tell us about yourself. And I said, I'm half African American, half Korean. And they looked at each other, and I was like, okay, that's good. That's a good thing. And then I just started talking about, the 2 characters, Sun and Jin, and how my mom was from Seoul, and how he could speak to that backstory. And then also, there was a character named Will on the show who's African American, and Michael and Rose, who were African American. So I spoke to that, and how my family's from the south side of Chicago, and they're, my father's side of the family during the Great Migration, like moved to the north from Arkansas because they were tired of being sharecroppers. So clearly they knew I could sort of like speak to those stories from an authentic place. And it was great in that room. That was a very hierarchical room. There were like 13 people on staff. I was the lowest title. I was a staff writer. But every time we talked about Sun and Jin, the whole room turned and looked to me because nobody knew anything about Korean culture except for like Korean barbecue. They didn't know anything. So it was great. I had sort of like a realm of authority as this very low-level writer. However, Jin did not speak English, and we had promised the fans and sort of like that we were going to kill someone off. And so Jin was the first name that came up in the writer's room, and myself and another writer, Javier Grillo-Marxwatch, who's Cuban-American, we're like, you can't kill the non-English speaking person off the island. And so he would approach it from a perspective of race because he was a supervising producer and he had the clout. I was a staff writer, and so I approached it from story. I was like, Jin is part of a married couple. If you kill him off, there's no married couples on the island represented in series regular. So then the showrunner was like, oh, that's a good point. So we sort of tag teamed it, and Javi was like, you can't really speak about it from a point of race. You'll be considered the race police. You're already the diversity writer. He was my mentor.
Advice.
Yeah, he was like, I will attack it from race point of view. He's like, I'm Spanish-speaking Cuban-American. I can attack it from that point. He was like, you attack it from story and character. So you have to be wise because you don't want to be like the race police. Now I'm very fortunate being the showrunner of Queen Sugar. I got to hire my staff, and we have a very diverse staff. Jason Wilborn, the number 2, is African-American. Anthony Sparks is African-American. They're both very different. Jason grew up in Orange County. He's probably the only black person in his grade, I know, probably in his school, he said. Anthony's from the south side of Chicago, one of like 8 kids or something, raised by a single mother. Dana Greenblatt, a Jewish American woman who I co-wrote an episode with on Nashville, just really fiercely smart, women's studies major, very woke. Mimi Wan, Korean American, very smart, has come off of a lot of big shows, serialized shows, really, really great producer. She's on the set now, juggling a lot. Who else? Oh, Davida Scarlett, our story editor, African-American, Jamaican, Jamaican descent. And then we've got Valerie Chu, who's my assistant, who's Chinese-American, who got a freelance. And we have Boafua, who is our other writer's assistant, who's Ghanaian-American, and Ben Kim, who's also Korean, who is our writer's assistant. And we have, I'm forgetting one person, Jamie, Jewish American woman. So we have a lot of diversity, but I mean, it's kind of, when you work for Ava DuVernay, that has to be a priority. We also have an all-female directors this season, amazing. Kat Candler is our producing director. She directed the first episode. Cheryl Dunye, who I've been a longtime fan of, directed the second episode. Aurora Guerrera directed the third episode. And we also, Ava this season, decided to go with all-female editors. So that's another sort of groundbreaking move on her part. So, yeah.
All right, so let's open up it to you guys. What questions do you have? And does anyone have a question?
Experience before. I don't know if that makes sense. I got distracted by the microphone.
I think for me, the biggest, so in terms of like issues of diversity and issues of being a woman in TV, it's still like the same, unfortunately. But I think the great thing is we're in a position of power where we can actually affect change. We can hire writers of color. We can hire female writers and directors and editors. I think the biggest challenge for me is, I actually have to diffuse that tension over there. Like, I'm the one that has to sort of take responsibility if there's a cranky writer in the room, like we're dealing with today, or, if there's an issue with the studio. It's like, it gave me a lot of respect for the people that I've worked under before in terms of their grace and just sort of the seamless nature with which they've diffused fires, because now you're sort of the one that has to be the trigger puller and like handle that hot mess over there, or this cut that just came in that is terrible and we might need reshoots. It's given me a great deal of respect for people who I've worked for before, and now being in that position.
Yeah, I think it made me angrier, and it also empowered me in a way. And for instance, I'll just, like, it showed me the global nature of things and how high up it is, I'd say. And just little things like, things you never think about, like extras in a scene. Like I shot a show in Australia, and I was like, I want 50% diversity extras. And I'll see the extras casting's like, you know we're in Australia, love. Like, she's like, there are no Latinos. I'm like, just do your best. So, it kind of gave me the big picture of what the power that I have, actually, and also really how kind of institutionalized some of this stuff is. If that makes any sense. So it's a really good question. Yeah.
Well, just piggybacking off of that, I was on a show where we were just casting like a day player. It was somebody who was working in an office. And after the entire day, like literally a few lines, I turned, and I was definitely not a producer level. And I just said, would it be possible to bring in a person of color? Like literally all day, it was nobody of color. And then what happened was the next day, it was nothing but people of color. And so I was like, on one hand, yay, but on the other hand, like, I wasn't sure, okay. And then I think I got labeled. Like,
The race
oh,
police.
she's
Yeah,
the race police. And I was like,
Yeah.
dang it, that's not what it meant. All right, who else? Yes.
Hi. So my question, and then I'm going to sort of back it up with perspective. So the question is how, when you're in the fellow opportunity and assistant opportunity, what keeps you driven? That's my question. But my perspective is, I actually came in here just seeing WGA, and I'm here representing SAG-AFTRA, so I'm just like, union, right? So I come in, and then literally just like 5 seconds ago during the question, I look, and then that's the name of it's Woman on Top. And I said, oh, great. I actually am not even open to my family about being trans. So it's like I already deal with the fact that I, pardon my language, but don't have a vagina. So it's like, so what do I do now kind of thing? So my question is, how do you keep driven? And then from my perspective, being a person of color, being trans, really don't seeing my kind of character represented strongly and positively, because literally as an actor in 2015 was True Detective, and I got cast as, and this is not a surprise to me, a transgendered prostitute on the street of LA. And being in the trans community, many of us, I'm sorry for talking so long, everybody. I just feel like I'm fighting for myself right now. A lot of us are sex workers. That's just reflective. The guy that, Ridley, the one that does American Crime.
John Ridley?
Yeah, John Ridley. I said, is it your, my question was, is it your, are you wanting to be the most diverse cast on network television? And he said, you know what? I have an issue with the word diversity. I look at it as reflective. So I've changed my vocabulary to reflective now, just in my life. So how do you keep driven when you're at assistant, fellow, I hate to say it, hierarchical level?
Let me just speak to that. Like I said, I grew up 4 or 5 miles east of here. What was my greatest weakness, which was being an outsider, kind of a biracial woman, small woman without a large command presence, is my greatest strength. Because I have a voice, nobody in Hollywood has my voice. And I guarantee you, nobody or very few people have a voice like yours. And that kept me driven for a really, really long time, because I firmly believe from the depths of my soul, I have something really, really unique to say that's not out there. And so that even to this day, I keep my eye on that prize. And it really drives me and drove me even early on breaking in. So don't forget that. Like what seems hard, what seems like your weakness is actually your greatest strength. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think I feel called to this business. I know that might sound strange. I'm a person of faith. I feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is why I'm here. And I feel like Natalie was saying, being half black and half Korean wasn't like the coolest thing when I was a kid. And just to see everything sort of line up when I had that meeting on Lost, it was like, oh, okay. Like, we're going to use all of that. We're going to use all of that feeling like an outsider, quite frankly, in both cultures, half the time of my life. We're going to use that. You can mine that, being able to mine from your own lives and from your pain. That's what we do in the writer's room. It's like group therapy almost. We mine from those experiences. So knowing that all of that it wasn't for nothing. It's so that I can speak to some of these issues of diversity and being a woman in this industry. We have a voice, and that's the greatest thing about what we do is we can address some of these issues not only from a managerial standpoint behind the scenes, but we can also address some of these issues, and that's what we're doing this season on the show. All the stuff that's going on in our country right now, we get to talk about it on the show. So I just feel like, I don't know, I'm kind of, once I set a goal type of person, I'm like, you're gonna have to like knock me down several times for me to get off track. And I just feel like it's, like Natalie said, we have the opportunity to tell these great stories and to mine from our lives and to mine from our own heartache and a lot of our challenges.
And I want to say another thing about that. Find a community of people, because if you have a writing group or like, Asian American theater group or anything, because I had those peeps were there for me like early on. I was involved in a lot of like Latino writing groups and groups at school. Like, those people really believed in me and they supported me, and to this day I'm still friends with a lot of them. So I would like highly encourage anybody who feels like that to get a group of people around you that believe in your creative endeavors and will support you. For me, it was invaluable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bonnie, I mean, this is a full circle moment for us because we're part of, we call it a Hapa group, and it's for half Asian.
Right, and we just met and we bonded, and then like we've been trying to have like a brunch or something like once a year, maybe once every 2 years.
Yeah.
now. But
We used to meet like quarterly, and we would
used to,
meet
yeah.
like
pre-children.
Yeah, pre-children. We used to meet quarterly, and we would go have dinner in K-Town, or we would pick a restaurant, and we would rotate it, and we would hear each other's struggles and gripes, and sort of encourage one another, and share information too, which is rare in this industry. Everyone's like, there's so few opportunities. I feel like everyone's like, mine, whereas we would actually share information, and one of the women in our group was like, hey, they're looking for a female person of color writer on this show. Like, you guys, I actually had that meeting. You guys should go too. And so we would share information, and now, we share pictures of our kids and sort of like war stories. But yeah, that group was a huge source of comfort and encouragement, as we're sort of like doing our thing.
So I agree. And just a short plug, there's also the Asian American Writers Committee at the Writers Guild.
Yes.
If you need a place.
Bonnie is
So,
the chair.
okay, we have time for one more question.
I'm a writer-director. I'm a Writers Guild member from the Latino Committee, and I've directed 6 feature films. My question to you is, how do you pick the writer-directors for your team? Because I directed features, but I'm trying to get into TV, and I've heard the networks have lists of approved writer-directors. So is it someone you get along? Is it the resume? Just wanted to know. Thank you.
That's a really good question. Yes. So execs have their lists, but I feel like, so I broke in, and Natalie broke in too, it sounds like, through a diversity program. Yours was ABC, mine was Fox. They have a lot of those programs for directors of color as well, and for women. I know CBS has one. I know Warner Horizon actually has a program as well. If you have directed no television or one episode of television, you qualify to be on this list. Also, you should shadow. A lot of directors break in from shadowing directors on a show. A lot of times those happen through those programs, but if you happen to know a friend of a friend who will allow you to shadow on a show, then you start getting noticed by the studio. I would apply to the program, I would shadow, and then I would try to have your agent have you set up some general meetings at the studio so that you can get on their radar. Ava pretty much knows directors that she's worked with in the indie world that she's interested in looking to break into TV. So that's like sort of her domain in terms of like, I want this director, I've admired this director for a really long time, and then those names come before like myself, the studio, and we all chime in and watch their material.
Everything she said is right. It is hard to make the jump from features to TV your first time. Any opportunity you get to do any kind of television, short form, is good, even if you're not directing a network thing, because they won't take you unless you have a super big feature credit behind you. Mm-hmm. So call all the studios, ask them if they have shadowing slash what did Ridley call it? The other term for diversity programs. Reflective. And that's your best way in, while you're also putting together a body of work that ideally will include even Spanish language television. Anything you can do in the television realm will help you make that jump.
All right, and actually I just want to wrap up with, is there any question that you wish I had asked, or is there a question that you feel like you're never asked but you feel like people really should know about this? Is there anything?
You can all do it. I was told many times that I was incapable of doing this job. I can't tell you how many people just were flat out like, just, nope, you're not qualified. So, like, if I can do it, I believe you guys can do it. That's all I got to say. Like,
I would just say, it's kind of piggybacking on the question that you just asked, whether you want to write, whether you want to direct, or whether you want to produce. Keep going to panels like these. It's through panels that I sort of like targeted a couple of agents that I then was able to submit material to. And then it was through panels like these that I actually, Eric Kim. I stalked Eric Kim, who now works at CBS. Yes. I stalked him at, I think it was a Cape event a long time ago. And he noticed that I was stalking him, and he was like, you clearly want to talk to me. And I spoke with him, and I said, hey, I'm looking to staff on a show. And he was like, you can come in and have a general with me. But it was from seeing him on a panel and then stalking him at a Cape Gala, and he allowed me to graciously come in and have 30 minutes of his time, and he gave me a lot of really good advice. And I feel like if you ask for a general meeting, most people will, depending on their schedule, get you in the door, sit down with you, answer your questions, and then you can ask them, who else should I have a general with? And most of them will give you another person's name. And that's how you get the information that you need. The information that I got from him in that 30-minute meeting probably saved me a year's worth of heartache and struggle, because he was just willing to share, like, yeah, don't even apply to that program. Like, that program's like looking for X, Y, and Z. You should focus on Fox. You should focus on ABC. You should focus on the CBS mentorship program. My other thing is the programs help. My manager signed me. She said, I wouldn't have signed you if you were not a writer's assistant and in a program. She said, I need things to sell you, and I need to be able to say good things about you, and a studio or network stamping you as like approved helps. So I would apply to the programs. I would try to get into the programs. They help.
Thank you both so very much.
Thank you.
And thank you all.